The whistle screamed through the darkened station, the air thick with the heavy hum of late-night trains. The last train of the evening was about to depart, its engine rumbling with an unsettling urgency, a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the bones of everyone waiting. The station was almost empty, save for a few scattered figures. A lone woman holding a worn-out suitcase, an old man clutching a cane, and at the far end, a dog. Not just any dog, but one with the kind of presence that demanded attention. The dog stood at the edge of the platform, its body rigid and tense, as though it had been waiting for this moment for years. Its fur, once sleek and healthy, was matted and dull now, and its eyes, a piercing amber, flickered between the dark train and the woman at its side. It was a German shepherd, its muzzle showing signs of age, its ears folded back in a way that suggested wariness. But something deeper, something that spoke of past betrayals, haunted the depths of those eyes. The woman, breath shallow and frantic, stepped forward, coaxing the dog with a shaky hand. "Come on, boy, we don't have much time." Her voice was strained, but there was a firmness to it, a quiet strength. But the dog, named Coda, did not move. The conductor, a tall, stocky man with a grizzled face and a cap pulled low over his brow, stepped toward them. His boots clanged loudly against the concrete as he approached, his clipboard held firmly in one hand. "Lady, you gotta get that dog on the train," he called, his voice gruff but not unkind. "The train's about to leave, and we can't delay." Coda's eyes never left the train. He lifted his nose to the wind, his ears twitching as the distant sound of the train's horn echoed through the night. The air felt heavy, charged, almost as if the world itself was holding its breath. The woman's hand trembled as she tried to tug at the leash. "Coda! Come on, it's okay." She turned to the conductor, a flicker of desperation creeping into her tone. "He's been through so much, Lady," the conductor interrupted, his voice sharper now. "There's nothing we can do. He has to board. Now." Coda, as if hearing the weight in the conductor's voice, glanced up at the man and then back to the train, his nostrils flaring. His body quivered slightly, a low growl vibrating in his throat. The woman, her eyes wide, stepped closer to him. "Coda, no." The conductor raised his brow, half annoyed, half curious. "What's the problem with him, huh? Never seen a dog this stubborn." The woman's face contorted with a mix of sadness and pain, but she said nothing for a moment, only crouching down beside Coda, speaking softly to him in a language the conductor couldn't understand. The dog's amber eyes softened, and for a heartbeat it seemed like he might listen, might follow her lead and board the train, just like any other good dog would. But then Coda took a single step back, his tail lowering, his eyes fixed firmly on the dark tunnel that swallowed the train's tracks. "No," he whispered, almost to himself, as if this simple, defiant refusal was the sum of all the pain he had carried in his bones. The conductor's eyes flickered between them, the air thick with confusion. "What the hell's wrong with him? We don't have time for this." He was about to reach for the dog's collar when Coda let out a sudden, low growl, a rumble so deep it felt like it came from the very earth itself. The woman froze, her heart pounding. "Coda, please," she whispered, the sound barely audible. And then Coda's growl shifted. It became something more, something darker, his gaze sharp and unwavering, locked onto the conductor. The rumbling growl escalated into something far more chilling, a growl that sent a cold chill down the conductor's spine. What's going on with him?" the conductor murmured, stepping back. The dog did not take his eyes off him. There was something in Coda's posture now, a silent command, as if he was telling the conductor to stay away. But then it hit him, like a bolt of lightning striking in the middle of a storm. Coda wasn't just resisting the train, he was protecting someone. Before the conductor could process what was happening, a shadowy figure appeared behind him, blocking the path to the train door. The woman's face drained of color, her lips moving soundlessly as she watched the figure step into the dim light of the station. The conductor stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for the radio clipped to his belt, but the shadowy figure was faster. There was a sharp, sudden pressure against his chest, and the conductor's breath hitched as his mind raced. Then the woman spoke again. her voice breaking the silence. He knew. He always knew. She looked at Coda, and in that moment, the weight of years of silence seemed to crash down on her. The conductor's hand froze on the radio as he began to understand. Coda had known. Coda had always known something was coming, something terrible. The woman turned slowly, eyes wide and full of unspoken fear, but also a quiet resolve. We have to go. Now. As if the world had just shifted, the first drops of rain began to fall, sharp and cold, mixing with the steam rising from the train, making everything feel alive. Alive with dread, with warnings. The conductor swallowed hard, but something inside him urged him forward. Maybe it was Coda's loyalty. Maybe it was the woman's fear. Or maybe it was the knowledge that something worse, something unspeakable, was waiting for them all. Not on the train, but at the edge of the tracks. Coda's head lifted again, his body tense, his teeth flashing in the dim light as he took one final step forward. And then the thunder cracked, a low, distant boom that seemed to rattle the very earth. And Coda howled, not in pain, not in fear, but in a sound that carried through the storm. A warning that something was about to unfold, something terrible, something that none of them could escape. The woman took a steadying breath and looked at Coda one last time. Stay close, boy. She didn't need to say anything more. Coda, without another moment's hesitation, moved to her side. The train's horn echoed in the distance, but the figure in the shadows was still watching. Waiting. The station fell silent, save for the pounding rain, as the conductor realized what was about to happen. The truth was already here, and there was no turning back now. The rain had started to fall harder, each drop now slicing through the heavy air like 1,000 tiny knives. The streetlights flickered as the wind picked up, twisting around the small platform. The train stood motionless, a beast of steel and shadow, its once vibrant lights now dim beneath the storm. It felt like a warning from the heavens themselves, drenched, cold, and just as unforgiving as the secrets that clung to this night. The conductor watched, his mind racing. His eyes kept darting between the woman and the German shepherd. He didn't know what was going on, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Coda's stance was rigid, every muscle coiled in readiness, and the way the dog's eyes darted back to the shadows made the conductor's stomach churn. He glanced over his shoulder toward the figure still standing in the dark. Whoever they were, they hadn't moved an inch since appearing at the edge of the platform. There was something unnatural about them, no quick movements, no attempt to blend in with the chaos of the night. It was as though they were waiting, just waiting for something, and they knew exactly how everything would unfold. A siren wailed in the distance, far off in the city, but it felt too late. Like the warning was meant for another time, another place. The moment felt too charged, too heavy with the weight of things unsaid. The woman's voice broke through the stillness, soft but urgent. You need to get on that train, now. The conductor turned back to her. Her eyes, wide with fear, were locked on the shadows now, her hands trembling at her sides. She wasn't just scared, she was terrified. And it wasn't just about Coda or the train. Something much darker was unfolding, and this woman, this stranger to him, knew more than she was letting on. The storm outside, the unsettling quiet, it was all building to something he couldn't yet see but felt deep in his bones. You're not going to make it if you stay here, she continued, taking a hesitant step toward him. Whatever this is, whatever he's protecting us from, it's already started. The conductor opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. His throat was dry, and the sound of the rain seemed to drown out everything else. He glanced back at the train, the metal wheels clinging to the tracks with a terrible finality, and then his gaze turned back to Coda. The dog, still staring into the dark, let out another low growl, more guttural this time, urgent. Get on the damn train, the conductor snapped, his patience wearing thin. The storm was pulling at his nerves, and the tension gnawing at him like a persistent ache in his chest made it harder to focus. You're wasting time! But the woman didn't flinch. She was staring straight into the darkness, a sense of knowing taking over her. She wasn't just waiting for something, she was waiting for a sign, the kind of sign that told her it was too late to turn back. And then the figure stepped forward. The conductor's pulse skipped. The figure was closer now, emerging from the shadows like some ghost from a past the world had long since forgotten. Dressed in dark clothing, their face barely visible beneath the hood, they walked with a purpose. Slow, deliberate, like they were savoring the tension in the air. Coda didn't flinch. The woman stiffened. "You?" Her voice faltered, but only for a second. "You shouldn't be here. Not now." The figure didn't respond. Instead, they took another step forward, and then the sound of footsteps echoed across the platform. It was a sound that made the conductor's skin crawl, a rhythmic, controlled sound, like a ticking clock counting down to something inevitable. Something inevitable and terrible. "Who the hell are you?" the conductor demanded, his hand instinctively reaching for the radio again. He wasn't sure if he was asking the figure or the woman, but the question lingered in the air, unanswered. The figure spoke, their voice cold, low. "It doesn't matter who I am." Their words were like ice, sending a shiver down the conductor's spine. "What matters is that you don't get on that train," the woman gasped, but it was Coda who reacted first. He lunged forward with a snarl, his body tense, ready to strike. The conductor felt his chest tighten. The dog wasn't just protecting the woman, he was warning them all. Whatever was happening, Coda knew more than they could possibly understand. The figure, unmoved by the dog's aggression, stepped back, their voice now a sharp whisper. "You've already made the mistake. The train is a trap." Coda's growl deepened, shaking the air around them as if the very sound itself was an explosion waiting to happen. His eyes locked onto the figure, unyielding, resolute. It was as though the storm around them had only just begun, and Coda was standing in its eye. "Enough," the woman said, her voice breaking through the tension like the sound of glass shattering. She moved to Coda's side, her hand trembling as she placed it gently on his back. "It's too late to turn back. It has already started." The conductor's heart hammered in his chest as the words settled into his mind. It has already started. A cold wave of realization swept over him. The figure had known the truth all along. He had only been a bystander, a cog in a machine he didn't understand. And now the storm outside, the rain, the train, it was all a part of something bigger, something darker. He was about to learn something he never expected. The station, the train, the shadows. They weren't the destination, they were the beginning. "You're not going to stop it," the woman whispered, her eyes fixed on Coda. "But we can try to make it right." The figure stepped back into the darkness, vanishing like smoke. For a moment, everything was still again, save for the pounding of the rain. The tension lingered in the air like a breath held too long. And then Coda turned, his eyes meeting the woman's for a fraction of a second before he began to move, slowly, deliberately toward the train. The woman followed, the storm at their backs, the darkness ahead, and the conductor's heart pounding in his chest as if he had just taken the first step into a nightmare he didn't yet understand. The train's whistle blew once more, long and mournful, the echo of a world slipping away into something else entirely. The train shuddered as it pulled away from the station, its wheels grinding against the tracks with a loud mechanical groan that rattled through the stillness of the night. The rain beat down relentlessly, hammering the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. Inside the train, the lights flickered sporadically, casting long shadows on the empty, sterile seats. The hum of the engine was almost deafening, but it was the silence between the woman and Coda that was louder than anything. She sat next to him, her hand resting gently on his scarred back. The air inside the train felt thick, suffocating, and the woman's breath came in shallow bursts. Her eyes were fixed on the window, but she wasn't seeing the rain-soaked world outside. She was lost in memories and fragments of a past she couldn't escape. The train's sudden movement had thrown her off balance, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were miles away, her mind tangled in knots that no amount of running could undo. She looked down at Coda, his head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed but alert, always alert. She felt his presence beside her, comforting in its quiet intensity, and yet something inside her twisted at the thought of what had brought them here. "I never thought it would come to this," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the train. Coda lifted his head at the sound of her voice, his amber eyes meeting hers, as if asking her to explain. She took a shaky breath, swallowing the lump in her throat. I thought I could outrun it. All of it. But now it's all coming back. She ran her fingers through her hair, tugging slightly, trying to erase the images from her mind. I thought I could protect you, boy. I thought I could protect us. The dog's eyes softened, and he shifted closer to her, nudging his nose against her hand. It was his way of saying he understood. Coda had been through hell too. He knew what it felt like to be betrayed by those meant to protect him. He knew what it felt like to be discarded, to be a weapon rather than a companion. And that was the thing about Coda. He wasn't just any dog. He had been bred for one purpose: to fight, to serve, to protect. And for years, that was all he had done, until the day he was left behind. The woman squeezed her eyes shut, as though trying to block out the memory of that day. The day they had tried to kill him. They had told her it was necessary. They had told her Coda was no longer fit for service. They had told her there was no place for a broken soldier in their ranks. But Coda hadn't been broken. Not completely. Not until they had tried to erase him from existence. I couldn't let them do it, she whispered, voice trembling. I couldn't let them kill you. Coda's eyes locked onto hers, the unspoken bond between them stronger than anything she could put into words. He had saved her in ways she couldn't explain, just as much as she had saved him. They were two pieces of a broken puzzle, both scarred by the same war, both seeking redemption in a world that had forgotten them. The woman wiped at her eyes, but the tears came anyway, falling freely down her cheeks. She felt the weight of everything they had both endured, the endless nights of running, the fear, the isolation. She had never been able to outrun the past. It had always followed her, just as it had followed Coda. But now, as the train hurtled toward the unknown, she realized something. It wasn't just about running anymore. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling against the windows. But inside the train, there was a sudden stillness, a moment where the world held its breath. Where are we going, Coda? She asked softly, though she already knew the answer. She wasn't asking him about the destination. She was asking him about the path they had chosen to take, the path that would lead them back into the darkness they had both tried to escape for so long. Coda didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was already there, woven into the very fabric of their bond. Whatever they were running from, whatever had brought them to this train in the first place, it wasn't just something in the past. It was still chasing them, and it wasn't done yet. Outside, the station they had just left was slipping away in the distance, the train speeding past dark fields and empty towns. The world beyond the windows blurred into a wash of gray and black, the shadows pressing in from all sides. But then, just as the woman began to let the weight of it all settle in her chest, a sharp sound sliced through the silence. The unmistakable shriek of metal on metal. The train jolted, throwing her forward in her seat. Coda growled low in his throat, his hackles rising, and for a moment it felt like time had stopped. She grabbed the armrest, her knuckles turning white. The train lurched again, and this time she felt it. Something was wrong. The lights above them flickered, then dimmed. A chill ran down her spine, but it wasn't the cold from the storm. It was the cold that came with an unshakable sense of dread. The train was slowing. Slowly, carefully, she stood, her hand still resting on Coda's back. He didn't move, but his body was tense, every muscle coiled as if waiting for the next move. She could hear the faint hum of the brakes screeching, the distant hiss of air. She moved down the narrow aisle, her heart pounding in her chest. And then, a voice, a low whisper that came from nowhere. It was barely audible over the sound of the train's gears grinding, but she heard it, clear as day. You shouldn't have gotten on this train. The woman froze. She turned, scanning the empty car, but saw no one. Her breath caught in her throat as her eyes darted nervously around the dimly lit space. Her skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, the hairs on the back of her neck standing at attention. She reached for Coda, who had already moved to her side. The dog's ears were back, his teeth showing in a silent snarl. And then she heard it again. The whisper, this time coming from directly behind her. You shouldn't have gotten on this train. A cold laugh followed, low and menacing. It came from the shadows, from the corner of the car where the light barely touched. The woman's heart raced. Her hand instinctively went to her gun, tucked beneath her jacket. But before she could reach it, a shadow moved. Swift, silent, like a predator in the dark. And for the first time since stepping onto this cursed train, she realized how deep the darkness really went. The sound of the whisper lingered in the air, stretching out like an invisible rope that pulled at her very soul. Every inch of her skin tingled with fear, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. The darkness at the far end of the train car seemed to deepen, swallowing the faint light that dared to spill from the flickering overhead bulbs. Coda's growl rumbled again, deeper this time, as if the dog could sense the very malevolent force pressing in on them. His body tensed even further, the air thick with the promise of something terrible. The woman's hand shot to the side of her jacket, fingers closing around the cold metal of her gun. Her breath quickened, but she didn't draw it out. Yet. The whisper came again, but this time it wasn't just a voice. It was a presence, an energy that seemed to crawl under her skin. You shouldn't have gotten on this train, it said, just as before. But this time, the words were followed by something else, something worse. A scraping sound, the sound of nails or claws dragging against the metal floor beneath them. Slowly, deliberately. The woman's eyes snapped to the source of the noise, her entire body on high alert. She could barely make out the shape of something moving in the darkness, a form sliding across the floor. A shadow with a shape, too large to be a man and too wrong to be anything she recognized. It was only for a moment, but that was enough. Coda lunged forward with a savage bark, his muscles rippling with pure instinctive aggression, his teeth bared as he charged toward the shadow. But before he could make contact, the creature in the dark slithered backward, retreating into the shadow with unnatural speed. "Stay close, boy," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible, the words trembling with the weight of the terror in her chest. She was no stranger to fear, but this was something different. This was primal. This was ancient. The train suddenly jolted again, this time harder, the force nearly throwing her off balance. She steadied herself against the nearest seat, her eyes scanning the car, her mind racing. Coda stayed by her side, the growls growing louder, more feral with every passing second. And then, the lights above flickered once more. This time, they didn't just flicker, they went out completely. The train plunged into pitch-black darkness, leaving her and Coda in a void of nothingness. Her pulse quickened as her fingers tightened around the grip of her gun. The only sound she could hear was the rush of her own breathing and Coda's low growl, which seemed to echo off the walls like a warning bell. There was something in that silence that felt so suffocating, so alive with the energy of threat. Then the whisper came again, and this time, it wasn't just one voice. It was multiple voices, layered on top of each other, distorted, like a chorus of torment. "You shouldn't have gotten on this train." They repeated the words over and over until the sound of them began to blur, turning into a cacophony of chilling madness. It was as though the walls themselves were speaking, whispering from every corner, from every crack in the train. She turned her head sharply, her breath caught in her throat. She could see nothing. But then a figure began to emerge from the shadows. It was slow, deliberate, tall, far too tall to be human, its movements jerky, unnatural. It was cloaked in a dark, tattered robe, and the air around it seemed to shift, the temperature dropping a degree with each step it took. The figure's face was hidden beneath a hood, but she could feel its eyes on her, heavy, suffocating. Coda didn't hesitate. He lunged again, this time faster than before. But as his teeth snapped, the figure twisted impossibly out of his reach, moving like something that shouldn't exist in the realm of the living. "Stay back!" the woman shouted, her voice coming out sharp, almost too loud in the eerie stillness. She raised her gun, her hands shaking, but the figure didn't flinch. Instead, it tilted its head, as though considering her, like it was watching a curious insect that had wandered into its web. And then, it spoke. "I've been waiting for you." The words were cold, drawn out, stretched like some ancient incantation. They seemed to crawl inside her mind, slithering around her thoughts, making her skin crawl. Coda barked again, louder, more frantic, but the figure's voice continued, reverberating in the empty train car. "You don't belong here. None of you do." The woman's fingers tightened around the trigger. The figure seemed to be able to feel the weight of her fear, the tension in the air. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't even a warning. It was something more insidious, a truth that had been waiting for them, patient and unrelenting. "You've crossed a line," the figure continued, "and now there's no going back. The train was never meant for you. You're not supposed to survive this." With a final chilling laugh, the figure stepped back into the shadows, its presence slowly dissolving like smoke. The train car, which had been heavy with its presence only moments ago, was now eerily silent again. The woman's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. The cold sweat on her back felt like ice, her legs trembling beneath her. She hadn't taken her eyes off the spot where the figure had been, but now it was just darkness again. Coda whimpered softly beside her, his head still turned toward the shadows, his body tense. He hadn't relaxed, hadn't let down his guard. He knew they hadn't seen the last of it. The woman's mind raced. The figure had said something she couldn't shake. "You've crossed a line." She glanced down at Coda, her heart heavy with unspoken words. "What does that mean, boy?" she whispered. "What does it mean that we're on this train?" She didn't expect an answer, but it didn't stop her from hoping. And then, the train jolted again, this time with more force, more violence, as if something beneath the tracks had shifted. The sound of metal screeching against metal filled the air, and with it, the unmistakable sound of a door slamming open somewhere down the car. A rush of cold wind flooded the compartment, carrying with it a bitter scent of decay and something worse, a stench that made her stomach lurch. The door. It was open. The woman's heart dropped into her stomach. Whatever was out there was no longer waiting for them to come to it. It was coming to them. The cold air rushed in like a tidal wave, carrying with it the scent of something rotten. The woman's heart slammed against her chest as she instinctively took a step back, pulling Coda closer. He was rigid beside her, his fur bristling, his nostrils flaring as the stench filled the small compartment. His growl rumbled low in his throat, a warning that sent chills down her spine. The door was open, gaping wide as though inviting something to enter. But the woman didn't need to see what was out there to know it was no longer a choice between running or hiding. Something was coming for them, and it wasn't something she could outrun. Coda barked again, sharp and fierce, but there was no sound from the hallway beyond. No footsteps, no movement, just the sound of the train's wheels grinding on the tracks, the occasional rattle of the overhead lights flickering, and the cold, biting wind that seemed to come from nowhere. She took another step back, eyes darting around the dimly lit car. The figures she had glimpsed earlier were gone. There were no shadows moving in the dark corners. Yet she knew something was still out there, watching them, waiting. The chill in the air seemed to grow, pressing in on her chest as she made her way toward the open door. The train car groaned as though protesting, but she ignored it. She needed to see what was out there. She needed to understand what kind of nightmare they were in. "Coda, stay," she muttered, her voice shaky as she crouched to his level. His amber eyes met hers, wide and full of understanding. It was clear he didn't want her to go anywhere near that door, but he knew there was no stopping her. Not this time. The woman's hand tightened around the gun at her side, her knuckles white against the dark leather. She didn't know if it would do any good, but she couldn't leave herself unarmed. With a final glance back at Coda, she stepped toward the door. Each footfall seemed to echo in the silence, the weight of every step bearing down on her. The wind howled through the train, whipping her hair around her face, making the cold bite even harder. It felt unnatural, this wind, this storm that had no reason to be. It wasn't the same as the storm outside. It was as if the train itself was being swallowed by something larger than them, something ancient. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the door frame as she peered into the dark corridor beyond. It stretched out before her, the train's flickering lights casting erratic shadows along the narrow passage. At first, there was nothing. The dark expanse seemed empty, like a forgotten part of the world. But then she saw it, a figure, barely visible in the shadows at the far end of the hallway. Tall, slender. Its movements were fluid, almost dreamlike, as though it didn't belong to this world. The figure was cloaked in a black, tattered robe, its face hidden beneath the hood. But it wasn't the figure that sent a cold wave of dread through her. It was the unmistakable sensation that this thing was not human. Coda growled from behind her, low and menacing, his voice rough with the weight of the danger that was drawing closer. The figure took a step forward, its footsteps silent on the train's cold metal floor. And in that moment, she realized something else. This was no longer just a threat. This was something that had been waiting for them, waiting for her. "You shouldn't have gotten on this train," the figure's voice echoed from the shadows. It was the same chilling tone from before, but now it was more present, more alive than ever. The words weren't a warning anymore. They were a promise. Her hands shook as she raised the gun, but she knew it wouldn't do a thing against this creature. Whatever it was, whatever it had become, it was too late to turn back. The figure moved again, a blur of shadow and movement, its face still hidden under the hood. It was closer now, impossibly closer, as if it had materialized from thin air. The air around her seemed to thicken, pressing in on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Her mind screamed at her to move, to run, to do something, anything, but her body refused. She was rooted in place, paralyzed by fear and the overwhelming sense that there was nowhere to hide. "You're too late," the figure rasped, its voice a dark echo that vibrated through her bones. "The train has already decided, and now you are its passenger, its prisoner." With a final unsettling laugh, the figure lunged forward, but not at her. It was at Coda. "No!" the woman shouted, her voice breaking as she reached out in a desperate attempt to stop it. But the creature was faster, its form flickering in and out of the shadows, impossible to track. Coda snarled, teeth bared, but the figure was already gone, vanished into thin air as though it had never been there to begin with. Coda leapt forward, his body low and ready to strike, but when he reached the spot where the figure had been, he stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes scanned the empty hallway, ears perked, but there was no sign of the thing. The train's rattling seemed louder now, like a distant war drum pounding in the background, and the lights flickered again, casting a cold glow on Coda's fur. The silence returned, thick and suffocating, but the woman could feel the weight of something pressing down on her chest. The figure was gone, for now, but it wasn't over. Coda stood still, his gaze locked on her, his eyes full of the same unspoken warning. "It's not over." The woman felt a shiver run down her spine. She didn't need to ask. She already knew. It was coming, and this time, there would be no escape. The train creaked and groaned, its metal body protesting the weight of a tension too heavy to bear. The stillness that followed the disappearance of the shadowy figure was almost worse than the confrontation itself. It was a suffocating quiet, broken only by the occasional rattle of the tracks beneath them and the low whine of the wind pressing against the windows. The woman's heartbeat was deafening in her ears, each pulse a drumbeat of dread. She stood frozen in the doorway, her hand still gripping the gun, but her body no longer felt like it belonged to her. The creature had vanished. Coda's growls had stopped, his fur still bristling, his muscles tense, but there was no immediate danger, or at least not the kind they could see. The darkness seemed to close in around them as the woman stepped back into the train car, her breath coming in shallow, quick bursts. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, waiting. It wasn't just the shadow. No, the train itself felt like it was alive now, humming with some dark, unspoken force. Coda stayed at her side, his amber eyes scanning the room with a vigilant focus. He could sense the unease, the danger that hung in the air. He was on edge, every muscle coiled tight, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. She didn't know how much time had passed since the figure had disappeared, but it felt like an eternity suspended between terror and the unknown. She stepped away from the door, retreating further into the car, but every step felt wrong. The floor beneath her boots creaked too loudly, the air too thick, and the faint hum of the train felt like an oppressive weight pressing down on her chest. Her mind raced with questions. Too many questions. Who was that figure? What was it? And why had it come for them? More importantly, what did it mean by, "The train has already decided"? Coda whined softly, drawing her attention. His head tilted to the side, his eyes narrowing as he stared at something just beyond her reach. For a second, she thought she saw a shadow move out of the corner of her eye. A flicker, like the briefest suggestion of movement in the corner of her vision. But when she turned, there was nothing there. It was too quiet. Her eyes darted around the car again. It was the same as before. The flickering overhead lights, the faint outline of empty seats, the grimy windows that looked out onto the dark, endless night. But something was different. The space felt off, as if the very walls were breathing, alive with a hunger she couldn't name. "Stay close, Coda," she whispered, though her voice didn't sound like her own. It was too thin, too fragile. The words came out as a hollow echo in the silence. Coda patted closer, his paws soundless against the floor. He nudged her with his nose, a brief moment of contact that grounded her, reminded her that there was still something real in this nightmare, something she could hold on to. But then a sound, soft, muffled, came from the far end of the car, just beyond the darkness where the figure had been. A dragging sound, the sound of something scraping against metal, slowly, relentlessly. Her body stiffened, her breath caught. She couldn't tell if it was real or if her mind had begun to play tricks on her. But it didn't matter. Coda heard it too. His head shot up, his body immediately tense, his stance shifting as if preparing to defend her. The scraping continued, louder now, closer. She moved toward the noise, her steps cautious, each one careful as if the very floor might give way beneath her. Her fingers wrapped tighter around the gun. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to turn back, to flee. But she couldn't. Not yet. She had to know. The scraping stopped just as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only silence in its wake. But now it wasn't the same silence. It was pregnant with tension, filled with the promise of something worse. She could feel it pressing in around her, suffocating, pulling at her breath. It was as though the train itself had become an extension of the darkness outside. Something was inside, something that didn't belong. And then, the lights flickered once more. This time, they didn't just flicker. They cut out entirely. The world plunged into absolute darkness, the kind of darkness that you could feel on your skin, in the pit of your stomach. The kind of darkness that made you question if your mind had invented it, or if it had always been there, lurking in the corners of your vision, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal itself. Her heart pounded in her chest, and the only sound she could hear was her own ragged breathing and the low growls that rumbled from Coda's throat. He was close now, his body pressed against her leg, his warmth a small comfort in the chilling void that surrounded them. "Stay with me, boy," she muttered under her breath, the words more for herself than for Coda. But before she could even process what was happening, the scraping sound came again, this time closer, impossibly close. It was no longer a distant noise. It was in the very walls, the very bones of the train. Something was inside, clawing its way toward them. Her pulse quickened as the darkness seemed to close in tighter, the air growing colder, heavier. And then, in the thick silence, she heard it. A voice, not the whisper from before. This was something different. It was a growl, low and guttural, like an animal's snarl. But it wasn't a dog's growl. It was deeper, more menacing. It came from all directions. She was trapped. The train was no longer a means of escape. It was a prison. And that voice, it spoke again, only this time, it wasn't a threat. It was a command. "Get off the train." The words sent a shock through her, the force of them reverberating in her bones. She didn't know what the figure meant, but she knew that she couldn't ignore this any longer. Something was coming for them, and this time, it wasn't just a shadow in the dark. It was real. The train continued its relentless journey through the night, but the woman felt as though time itself had stopped. The voice still echoed in her mind, its command clear and terrifying. "Get off the train." It wasn't just a warning, it was an order, as if something had taken control, and the train was no longer a vehicle, but a vessel for something darker, something ancient. Koda's growl deepened, vibrating through her as he stood firm by her side, his muscles taut with unease. She could feel his body trembling slightly, the fine hairs along his back prickling. The bond between them was unspoken but unbreakable, forged in fire and survival. Koda had always been her protector, but tonight it was as though the roles had reversed. He was afraid. And if Koda, who had faced countless threats in his years of service, was afraid, then she knew they were in grave danger. The darkness around them pressed in, thick and suffocating, like a physical force. She could no longer tell if the train was moving faster or slower, or if it was even moving at all. The stillness was maddening. The air was too cold, too heavy. Each breath she took seemed to come from somewhere distant, like she was trying to inhale the very soul of the night. Her fingers tightened around the gun, but it was just a lifeline, a comforting tool in an impossible situation. It wouldn't save them from whatever had taken over this train. She had no illusions about that. Her mind raced for answers, for a plan, but there was only one clear thought. They had to get off. But how? The scraping sound returned, louder now, closer, dragging itself along the metal floor, scraping across every surface, every wall. It was like the train itself was alive, its very bones creaking in agony. The lights flickered again, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to twist and shift with every beat of her pulse. It was no longer just a malfunction. It felt like the very heart of the train was beating out of sync with theirs. The woman's chest tightened, and her breath hitched as a figure appeared. This time, not in the shadows, but in the light, standing just beyond the entrance to the next car. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its form twisted and wrong. The same hooded figure from earlier, but now it was no longer just a shadow. It was real, standing there, staring at her with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Its lips barely moved when it spoke, but the voice that emerged was louder than before, booming in her mind as though it came from the very walls of the train. "You're too late," it hissed. "The train has already decided. You belong to it now." The words hung in the air, cold and suffocating. There was no escape, no way to run. This was no longer about fighting for survival. It was about surrendering to the inevitable. Koda barked a sharp, desperate sound, his body launching forward in a split second, ready to protect. But the figure was faster. Before Koda could react, the figure stepped forward, vanishing from sight with a flicker, only to reappear right in front of them. Its cold, invisible presence felt like a hand closing around her throat. "Koda!" she shouted, her voice raw, strained. But Koda wasn't having it. His instincts, honed from years of training, kicked in. With a low growl, he lunged at the figure, teeth bared. But this time, the creature didn't recoil. It didn't even flinch. Koda's teeth sank into what should have been flesh, but it was like biting into nothingness. An empty void that closed around his teeth, biting back at him with a force that sent him crashing to the floor. She watched in horror as her loyal partner struggled, trying to free himself from the invisible grip of the figure. Koda's body convulsed as if it were being pulled apart by some unseen force, his muscles jerking unnaturally. She could hear his labored breathing, the rasp of his throat as he struggled for air. The figure held him with ease, its power suffocating, as though it were made of the very darkness around them. The woman didn't think. She just acted. With a frantic scream, she charged forward, gun raised. Without a second thought, she fired. Twice, then 3 times, her shots piercing the empty space where the figure had been standing. But the bullets didn't hit anything solid. They passed through it as if it were a mirage, a shadow in the night. And just like that, the figure was gone again, vanishing into the same black void that had swallowed it whole. Koda lay there panting, his body trembling from the effort. His fur was matted with sweat, his eyes wide with confusion and pain. She rushed to his side, her hands shaking as she stroked his fur, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's okay, buddy," she whispered, though she could barely find the strength to speak. Her voice cracked as she reassured him, but the truth was, she wasn't sure anything was okay anymore. Coda whined a soft, broken sound and licked her hand. But even in that moment, she knew he wasn't the only one broken. Something inside of her had snapped, and she could feel it in every fiber of her being. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for her soul. The train groaned again, and the darkness outside seemed to press harder, clawing at the edges of the windows. Through the glass, she could see the trees flashing by in a blur, distorted by the night, but there was no light ahead. No promise of anything but more shadows. It was coming. Whatever it was. She could feel its presence drawing closer, feel the pressure building until it was almost unbearable. Coda growled low in his throat, standing to his feet, his body still trembling. But there was a fire in his eyes now, a fire that matched hers. He was ready. They both were. They just had to make it off the train. And maybe, just maybe, they could put an end to this nightmare. The air felt colder now, an unnatural chill that crept into her bones, seeping deep into her skin. Every breath she took came out in a puff of mist, as though the world had turned into a frozen wasteland. The lights flickered once more, but this time they didn't just flicker. They hummed with a low, resonant vibration, as if they too were alive, pulsing with an eerie energy. She stood there, frozen, her back pressed against the wall of the train car, eyes darting nervously between the door at the far end and the pitch-black abyss beyond the windows. Coda was at her side, still panting, but his posture had changed. His ears were pinned back, his teeth bared in a low growl, as if he could sense the darkness closing in around them. The train rumbled on, the tracks beneath them groaning with every twist and turn. There was no telling where they were now. No way to know if they were still heading toward their destination or if the train had taken them somewhere far off course. The further they went, the more isolated they felt. It was as if the world outside no longer existed, swallowed up by the endless night that surrounded them. "Why are we still here?" she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the growling hum of the train. "Why are we still here, Coda?" Coda looked up at her, his eyes full of understanding, the weight of their shared ordeal pressing down on them both. She could see the question in his eyes, too. What were they supposed to do? How could they escape? And then it came again, the scraping sound. This time, it wasn't just from one direction. It was everywhere. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, every surface seemed to be alive with that same awful, scraping noise. She swallowed hard, but her throat was dry, her heart racing in her chest. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, no escape from this nightmare. A flicker of movement caught her eye, a shadow darting across the far end of the train car, too quick to be seen clearly. Her breath hitched in her chest, her body instinctively moving toward the door. But before she could make it, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. She spun around, heart pounding, only to find that the figure was standing there. Not in the shadows this time, not a flicker or a whisper, but standing right in front of her. Tall, cloaked, its face obscured by the darkness that seemed to leak from its very being. "There's nowhere to run," it spoke, its voice cold and disembodied, echoing from all directions at once. The sound made her stomach twist, her knees weak beneath her. "You've already made your choice." Her heart sank. It knew what they had done, what they had agreed to by staying on this train. Coda's growl deepened, his body low to the ground as he braced himself, his muscles coiled like springs. But he didn't charge. Not yet. The figure tilted its head, its form shifting, as though it were studying them, trying to decide what to do next. Its presence was oppressive, suffocating. The air around them felt heavier, the temperature dropping with every passing second. "You don't understand," the figure continued, its voice like a dry rasp. "The train has its own path, its own fate. It is bound to the night, to the darkness. You can never leave it. Once you've boarded, you become part of it, part of its journey." Her hands shook as she reached for the gun once more, but it felt like such a small thing in the face of this creature, this force. A moment of silence stretched out between them, and in that stillness, she could almost hear the train's heartbeat, slow and steady. Coda shifted, and for a moment, she thought he was going to leap at the figure, but instead he stepped back, his eyes still locked on the cloaked form. It was as if he, too, had come to understand something she hadn't yet, something beyond their ability to fight. "Why?" she managed to choke out. The word was barely more than a whisper, but it carried all her confusion, her fear, her desperate need for answers. "Why us?" The figure didn't answer right away. It simply stood there, as though considering her question. Finally, it spoke again, its voice colder than ice. "Because you are broken, and the train is where broken things go." It raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, and the air seemed to bend with it. The lights in the train flickered violently, casting wild, erratic shadows that danced across the walls, the seats, the floor. The figure's eyes, those glowing eyes, locked with hers, and she felt herself frozen, her body betraying her, unable to move. "You belong here now," the figure said, "and you will never leave." Her pulse raced. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to run, to escape, to fight. But deep down, she knew the truth. The train had already made its choice. They were part of its story now, and there was no getting off. She took a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she lowered the gun. There was no point in holding on to it anymore. This was not a battle she could win, not with weapons, not with strength, but there was one thing she could still do, one thing they could do together. She reached down, her fingers brushing Koda's fur, and he immediately responded, pressing into her touch with a low, reassuring whine. They were in this together, and whatever came next, they would face it side by side. The figure stepped forward, its form growing darker, more solid with each movement. She took one last look at the window, at the endless darkness that surrounded them, and knew what had to be done. Koda nudged her, his eyes filled with a quiet determination. He understood too. "Whatever it take," she murmured, more to herself than to him. And with that, she turned to face the figure that represented everything broken, everything twisted, the creature that had claimed this train as its own. But they weren't just going to be swept along. Number not without a fight, not without a chance to reclaim their fate. Together they would rewrite the story. The figure's presence loomed, an oppressive weight that pressed down on her chest. It seemed to breathe the very darkness around them, the air so thick that it felt suffocating. For a moment, it was as though the entire train had become a living, breathing entity, its corridors twisting and shifting as if it were alive, responding to the figure's every move. She stood firm, her resolve hardening like steel in her chest. Koda, too, seemed to draw strength from the moment, his posture still low, but his eyes locked onto the figure with an intensity that matched hers. He was ready. He knew this wasn't just another battle. It was the battle, the one that would determine everything. "You think you can change the rules," the figure said, its voice now a deep, hollow echo, each word reverberating through her bones. "You cannot escape. This train is bound to its purpose. It has been for generations, and it will continue long after you are gone." Her fingers curled into fists. This train had become a prison for lost souls, for those who had been discarded by the world. And yet, as she stood there, facing the creature that controlled it, something inside her shifted. She wasn't just some passenger on this journey. She wasn't here by accident. "This train doesn't own me," she spat, her voice trembling with fury, "and it doesn't own him." She jerked her head toward Koda, who stood beside her, his growl deepening in his throat, his body vibrating with energy. The loyalty between them, the bond they shared, was stronger than any dark force this creature could summon. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about purpose, about reclaiming control over their own fate. The figure's form wavered, its cloak shifting like liquid shadows. A low guttural laugh spilled from its lips. "You misunderstand," it said, the sound low and almost mocking. "The train doesn't own you, but it will consume you, as it has consumed so many before you. Once you've boarded, there's no going back. There's no escape from the path the train has set. No escape from the darkness it carries." Her heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to look away. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, to flee, but she wouldn't. Not this time. They had already come too far. Koda, her loyal partner, her protector, was ready to fight. And if he was willing to fight, so was she. "Then I'll make my own path," she said, her voice strong, cutting through the hum of the train. She raised her chin, the weight of her words hanging between them. "You may control the train, but I will control what happens next." The figure's eyes burned brighter, an unnatural glow piercing the darkness. "You cannot defy the train. It has its own will. It has its own power." Her eyes flicked to the tracks beyond the windows, but all she could see was blackness, endless and consuming. The train wasn't just a machine. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was something much older, something more dangerous. It had a mind of its own, but that didn't matter anymore. She couldn't afford to think like that. She took a deep breath, the weight of the moment settling in her chest. Every instinct told her this was their last chance, the last chance to take control and stop whatever was happening before it consumed them completely. Coda moved closer to her, pressing his shoulder against hers, as if to remind her that they were in this together. She felt the warmth of his fur, the steadiness of his presence. In that moment, everything else fell away. There was nothing but the two of them, and the shadow that stood before them. "Do you think I'm afraid?" she asked, her voice low but full of defiance. She stepped forward, her fingers tightening around the gun once more, though she knew it wouldn't be enough. It wasn't about the gun. It wasn't about fighting with force. This was about will, about the strength of their bond, the strength of their resolve. "I'm not afraid of you." The figure's laugh echoed again, but there was something different in it this time, something almost uncertain. It hesitated just for a moment, as though it hadn't expected her to stand her ground. The flickering lights overhead buzzed and hummed, a low, vibrating sound that seemed to draw the tension tighter until it was almost unbearable. Coda let out another growl, the sound reverberating through the car, and with a sudden motion he lunged forward. It was quick, too quick for the figure to react. The dog's teeth sank into the figure's cloak, his jaws snapping around the fabric, pulling at it with all his might. The figure staggered, taken by surprise, and for a moment the shadows that surrounded it flickered, briefly revealing what lay beneath. It was nothing but darkness, swirling and shifting, a void that seemed to consume the very light around it. And in that instant, she understood. The train wasn't just alive, it was feeding off the lost, the broken. It fed on fear, on despair, on hopelessness. And as long as the darkness remained, as long as it continued to haunt them, it would never stop. But Coda had revealed its weakness. The figure stumbled back, its form warping, as if it couldn't hold itself together. Coda's teeth clenched tighter, his growl rising in intensity. She took one last, steadying breath, then aimed the gun at the space where the figure's head should be, and fired. The shot rang out, loud and sharp, echoing through the car, and the figure screamed, a high-pitched, guttural sound that shook the very walls of the train. The shadows around it flickered and shrieked in protest, but they couldn't hold on. The figure dissolved into darkness, its form vanishing with a final, desperate hiss. And just like that, the oppressive weight lifted. The air began to clear, the freezing cold receding, and the train's low hum shifted into a quieter, more natural rhythm. She could feel the change. It was subtle, but it was there. The train was no longer suffocating them. The darkness was no longer controlling them. Coda stood at her side, panting heavily, but his eyes were clear, the tension in his body easing. He was exhausted, but there was no more fear. The train had been broken, its power shattered, but they still had to get off. Together, they turned toward the door at the far end of the car. There was no way of knowing if it was the end of the line, or if they would be walking into something even darker. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was walking into an unknown abyss. She felt like she was stepping into the light. They were free, at least for now. The door at the far end of the train car creaked open, its movement slow and deliberate, as though it too had been trapped in the grip of the creature that had haunted them. The faint light beyond spilled in like a promise, soft and golden, cutting through the shadows that still clung to the train's walls. It was the first light they had seen in what felt like forever, a light that wasn't tainted by fear, by darkness. Elena stepped forward, her boots clanging lightly against the metal floor as she crossed the threshold. Coda at her side, his movements steady but cautious. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, the last step away from the nightmare, the last step toward freedom. She didn't know where this path would lead, but at that moment it didn't matter. All that mattered was the now, the train, the darkness. It was all behind them. They had fought through it together. They had faced the abyss and emerged, scarred but unbroken. But still, the journey wasn't over. There was more to face, more to uncover. The truth they had uncovered wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The landscape outside was strange, different from what she had expected. It wasn't the city she had hoped to reach, nor the familiar stretch of land she thought she had known. Instead, it was a vast, open field, the edges of it blurring into a distant, misty horizon. The train tracks stretched out behind them, disappearing into the endless expanse of grass and fog. It was beautiful, haunting, like something out of a dream. But even in its beauty, there was something unsettling about the stillness, as though the world had been waiting for them to emerge from the dark. She turned to Coda, meeting his eyes, and for the first time, there was no doubt in her heart. She wasn't alone, not anymore. Coda's tail wagged slightly, and for a moment, she allowed herself a small, shaky smile. There was so much weight in that simple gesture. It wasn't just a dog wagging its tail. It was a promise, a silent vow that they would keep going, together. "What now?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. But Coda's soft whine was all the answer she needed. The road ahead was uncertain, but they had the strength to face it. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the bond they shared. No matter where the path led, they would walk it side by side. The wind picked up, swirling around them, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and the distant echo of thunder. It was as if the world was breathing again, shaking off the remnants of the storm that had nearly consumed them. The mist parted slightly, revealing a distant figure standing on the horizon. A person, though the details were still too far to make out. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Was it a traveler, like them, or someone more? But before she could dwell on it, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The train behind her, though still and silent, felt like it was fading away, becoming a part of the earth itself, swallowed by the land they had entered. The past was being left behind, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Elena felt herself exhale. Coda nudged her with his nose, pulling her from her thoughts, and she glanced down at him. His eyes were wide, ears perked, waiting for her next move. She nodded, reaching down to pet him, feeling the warmth of his fur beneath her hand. He had been the anchor, the one thing that had kept her grounded through it all, the one thing she had never lost faith in. Without another word, they moved forward, the mist swirling around their legs like a soft, persistent reminder of everything they had survived. The figure in the distance hadn't moved, still standing, waiting for them. The tension in Elena's body returned, a quiet ripple of uncertainty passing through her. But it was different now. It wasn't the same fear that had clawed at her when the train had started its journey. No, this was a new kind of anticipation. She wasn't walking toward a threat anymore. She was walking towards something that could help her understand what had happened, what the train had been, and what it all meant for the future. They had fought, they had survived, and now they would find out what came next. "Let's go," Elena whispered, her voice strong again, her chest rising with the breath of someone who had finally taken control of their own fate. Coda responded with a soft bark, his tail swishing as he trotted forward beside her. They were moving toward whatever came next, into the unknown. Yes, but no longer with fear, with purpose. The mist parted before them as they walked, slowly but steadily, and the figure in the distance finally came into clearer view. A woman, tall and weathered, standing at the edge of the field. Her eyes locked onto Elena's, and for a fleeting moment, Elena felt something stir within her, a quiet recognition. The woman's lips parted as if to speak, but Elena was the first to break the silence. The door at the far end of the train car creaked open, its movement slow and deliberate, as though it too had been trapped in the grip of the creature that had haunted them. The faint light beyond spilled in like a promise, soft and golden, cutting through the shadows that still clung to the train's walls. It was the first light they had seen in what felt like forever. a light that wasn't tainted by fear, by darkness. Elena stepped forward, her boots clanging lightly against the metal floor as she crossed the threshold. Coda at her side, his movements steady but cautious. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest, the last step away from the nightmare, the last step toward freedom. She didn't know where this path would lead, but at that moment it didn't matter. All that mattered was the now, the train, the darkness. It was all behind them. They had fought through it together. They had faced the abyss and emerged, scarred but unbroken. But still, the journey wasn't over. There was more to face, more to uncover. The truth they had uncovered wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The landscape outside was strange, different from what she had expected. It wasn't the city she had hoped to reach, nor the familiar stretch of land she thought she had known. Instead, it was a vast, open field, the edges of it blurring into a distant, misty horizon. The train tracks stretched out behind them, disappearing into the endless expanse of grass and fog. It was beautiful, haunting, like something out of a dream. But even in its beauty, there was something unsettling about the stillness, as though the world had been waiting for them to emerge from the dark. She turned to Coda, meeting his eyes, and for the first time, there was no doubt in her heart. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Coda's tail wagged slightly, and for a moment, she allowed herself a small, shaky smile. There was so much weight in that simple gesture. It wasn't just a dog wagging its tail. It was a promise, a silent vow that they would keep going, together. "What now?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. But Coda's soft whine was all the answer she needed. The road ahead was uncertain, but they had the strength to face it. She could see it in his eyes, feel it in the bond they shared. No matter where the path led, they would walk it side by side. The wind picked up, swirling around them, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and the distant echo of thunder. It was as if the world was breathing again, shaking off the remnants of the storm that had nearly consumed them. The mist parted slightly, revealing a distant figure standing on the horizon. A person, though the details were still too far to make out. Elena's heart skipped a beat. Was it a traveler, like them, or someone more? But before she could dwell on it, the ground beneath her feet shifted. The train behind her, though still and silent, felt like it was fading away, becoming a part of the earth itself, swallowed by the land they had entered. The past was being left behind, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Elena felt herself exhale. Coda nudged her with his nose, pulling her from her thoughts, and she glanced down at him. His eyes were wide, ears perked, waiting for her next move. She nodded, reaching down to pet him, feeling the warmth of his fur beneath her hand. He had been the anchor, the one thing that had kept her grounded through it all, the one thing she had never lost faith in. Without another word, they moved forward, the mist swirling around their legs like a soft, persistent reminder of everything they had survived. The figure in the distance hadn't moved, still standing, waiting for them. The tension in Elena's body returned, a quiet ripple of uncertainty passing through her. But it was different now. It wasn't the same fear that had clawed at her when the train had started its journey. No, this was a new kind of anticipation. She wasn't walking toward a threat anymore. She was walking towards something that could help her understand what had happened, what the train had been, and what it all meant for the future. They had fought, they had survived, and now they would find out what came next. "Let's go," Elena whispered, her voice strong again, her chest rising with the breath of someone who had finally taken control of their own fate. Coda responded with a soft bark, his tail swishing as he trotted forward beside her. They were moving toward whatever came next, into the unknown. Yes, but no longer with fear, with purpose. The mist parted before them as they walked, slowly but steadily, and the figure in the distance finally came into clearer view. A woman, tall and weathered, standing at the edge of the field. Her eyes locked onto Elena's, and for a fleeting moment, Elena felt something stir within her, a quiet recognition. The woman's lips parted as if to speak, but Elena was the first to break the silence. If this story moved you even a little, don't forget to like, share, and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more powerful emotional stories like this one, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. There's so much more to come.